was no larger than a paperback novel, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and sealed inside a steel safe that had been welded shut behind a false wall in the sub-basement archive of Kensington Palace. The safe was not on any blueprint. It was not listed in any inventory. It had been installed in 1995 by a private contractor who signed a lifetime non-disclosure agreement and died in 2018 without ever speaking of it. The diary was discovered on a Thursday morning in late October by two junior archivists conducting a structural survey ahead of scheduled renovations. They found the safe by accident when a moisture sensor triggered an alert in a section of wall that should have been solid brick. When the safe was finally opened under forensic supervision 48 hours later, the diary inside was identified immediately. Not by its contents, by its handwriting. The looping, hurried, slightly slanted script that appears on every letter Diana ever wrote. And when the first page was turned, under archival gloves, in the climate-controlled reading room of the Royal Archives, the senior archivist read 3 lines and stopped. She closed the diary. She removed her gloves. She walked to the secure phone on the wall and dialed a number that only 4 people in the United Kingdom possess. She said 5 words. He needs to see this. And within 90 minutes, King Charles III was sitting alone in that reading room, holding his dead wife's diary in his hands, reading words she had written 30 years ago in a language of grief he had never been permitted to hear. And when he finished, he set the diary down, placed both hands flat on the table, and said, to the empty room, to the silence, to the ghost of the woman whose words had just unravelled the last thread of his capacity to reign, I cannot carry this crown while carrying this truth. Before we reveal what Diana wrote in those pages, what she documented about her marriage, about the institution, about the specific moments of institutional cruelty that she recorded with the precision of a witness and the anguish of a prisoner, before we walk through the 72 hours between the diary's discovery and Charles's decision to step down, and before we describe the moment William received the call that changed the trajectory of the monarchy forever, make sure to hit subscribe to Crown Watch and turn on the notification bell. Because this story is not about scandal. It is not about revenge. It is not about exposing secrets for the sake of exposure. It is about a woman who wrote the truth because she knew she would not live to speak it, and a man who read that truth 30 years later and understood, with devastating clarity, that the crown he wears was built on the silence that killed her, and that he could no longer wear it. To understand why this diary ended a reign, we must first understand what it is. This is not the Bashir interview tapes. This is not the Morton book note. This is not the Spencer family letters or the royal correspondence already held in the archives. This is a private diary written between January 1993 and June 1995, during the most isolated, most surveilled, most institutionally suffocated period of Diana's life. It was written in code, a simple substitution cipher based on a poetry anthology she kept on her nightstand. A cipher she developed herself after realizing that her personal papers were being routinely searched by household staff acting on palace instructions. The diary was never meant to be found. It was meant to survive. Diana hid it in the safe not as a weapon, but as a testament. A record of what was done to her, by whom, and in what name. She wrote it not for publication, but for preservation. For the day when someone, someday, might need to know the truth that the institution had buried. And that day came on a Thursday morning in late October, when 2 junior archivists found a safe behind a wall and opened a door that had been sealed for 30 years. The diary contains 214 pages. Of those, 187 are decipherable. The remaining 27 are water-damaged or coded in a variant cipher that has not yet been fully broken. The deciphered pages cover 29 months of Diana's life. They document, in meticulous detail, the mechanisms of institutional control that were deployed against her. Not the tabloid harassment, not the public scrutiny. Those are well documented. The diary documents the internal machinery, the surveillance, the interception of her mail, the monitoring of her phone calls, the deliberate isolation engineered by senior courtiers acting under authority they claimed came from the sovereign, the psychological pressure applied through controlled leaks to friendly journalists, the systematic undermining of her charitable work, the restriction of her access to her children, the gaslighting, the silencing, the erasure. All of it recorded in Diana's own hand, in her own words, with dates, names and specifics that transform what was previously rumour and speculation into documented fact. But the diary is not merely a record of institutional abuse. It is also a record of love, of Diana's love for her sons, of her terror that they would be consumed by the same machine that was consuming her, of her desperate, coded attempts to protect them from within the system that offered her no protection. She writes about William, then 11, watching her cry and asking if he could make it stop. She writes about Harry, then 9, hiding under his bed during arguments he was too young to understand. She writes about the nights she stayed awake, listening to their breathing through the nursery monitor, wondering if the institution would take them from her the way it had taken everything else. She writes about her fear that her death would be used to sanitize the very system that was destroying her. And she writes, in an entry dated March 14, 1995, a sentence that would, 30 years later, break the man who read it. If I do not survive this, they will say I was unstable. They will say I was difficult. They will say I brought it upon myself. And my boys will grow up believing the lie because there will be no one left to tell them the truth. So I am writing this, not for me, for them, for the day when they are old enough to read it and know that their mother was not mad. She was silenced. Charles read that sentence at 3:47 p.m. on the day the diary was delivered to him. He read it in the archive reading room, alone, under the watchful gaze of the senior archivist who stood silently by the door. He read it twice. Then he set the diary down. He placed both hands flat on the table. He stared at the leather cover, and he did not move for 11 minutes. The archivist later described those 11 minutes as the longest silence she had ever witnessed in 30 years of archival service. Not the silence of shock, not the silence of grief, but the silence of a man confronting a truth so absolute, so irrevocable, so morally unanswerable that it dissolved the foundation upon which his entire identity as sovereign had been built. When Charles finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He said, "She was right. They did say she was unstable. They did say she was difficult. They did say she brought it upon herself. And my boys did grow up believing the lie. And I let them, and I cannot undo it. And I cannot reign over an institution that required that lie to survive." The decision to step down was not made in that room. It was formed there, in the silence, in the confrontation with the diary. But it was executed over the following 72 hours, in a series of conversations that reshaped the future of the monarchy. Charles summoned William first, not through intermediaries, directly. William arrived at Buckingham Palace at 8 p.m. that evening. He was shown into the king's private study. Charles was sitting at his desk. The diary was on the desk, closed. Charles did not offer it to William. He said, "Your mother wrote this. Between 1993 and 1995, it documents what was done to her, by the institution, in my name, with my complicity. Through my silence, I have read it, and I have decided that I cannot continue as king while this truth remains unacknowledged. I am stepping down. You will succeed me, and you will do what I could not, acknowledge what was done to her, publicly, fully, without qualification, without defense, without the institutional reflex to protect itself at the expense of the truth." William did not respond immediately. He looked at the diary. He looked at his father. He saw, for the first time in his life, a man who was not performing kingship, not managing optics, not balancing competing interests, a man who had been broken open by the truth and had chosen, in the breaking, to lay down the crown rather than carry the lie forward. William said, "You're certain." Charles said, "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." William said, "The institution will resist. The government will panic. The public will demand explanations you cannot give without causing further harm." Charles said, "Then let them resist. Let them panic. Let them demand. I have spent my entire life resisting, panicking and demanding in service of an institution that required my mother's destruction to maintain its equilibrium. I will not spend whatever years remain to me continuing that service. The truth is more important than the crown. And the truth is in that diary. And the diary is your mother's. And your mother's truth deserves more than my reign can give it." Catherine was informed next. She arrived at the study at 9:30 p.m. She read the diary in full over the course of 2 hours, while Charles and William sat in silence. When she finished, she closed the diary and placed it back on the desk. She looked at Charles and said, "She wrote this for William and Harry, not for us, not for the institution, not for history, for her son. And if you step down, the reason must be centered on her truth, not on your guilt. Your guilt is real. But it is not the point. The point is her voice. The point is her record. The point is honoring what she wrote in the way she intended, not as a confession from you, but as a testimony from her." Charles nodded. "Then help me frame it that way. Help me make her voice the center, not mine." And Catherine, who has spent her entire royal life building bridges between the institution and the human beings trapped within it, began the work of translating a king's abdication into a mother's vindication. Harry was told by phone at 6 a.m. California time. He was in his kitchen in Montecito making coffee when William called. William did not summarize. He did not editorialize. He said, "We found Mum's diary, a private diary, from 1993 to 1995. She wrote about what was done to her, about the surveillance, the isolation, the silencing. Dad has read it. He's stepping down. He wants you to know before anyone else. And he wants you to know that his decision is not about absolving himself. It's about acknowledging her, fully, publicly, without defense. And he wants you to be part of how that acknowledgement is shaped, because she wrote it for you, for both of us, and you deserve to decide how her truth is honored." Harry was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Does it mention me?" William said, "Yes, she wrote about protecting you, about staying awake listening to you breathe, about fearing that the institution would take you from her, about wanting you to know she wasn't mad. She was silenced." Harry's voice broke. "She was always silenced." William said, "Not anymore." The formal announcement was made 72 hours after the diary's discovery. It was not framed as an abdication due to health, age, or incapacity. It was framed, at Charles's explicit insistence, as an act of institutional accountability. The statement, drafted by Catherine and approved by William, read, "His Majesty the King has decided to step down from the throne, effective at midnight on date. This decision follows the discovery of a private journal kept by Diana, Princess of Wales, between 1993 and 1995, which documents systemic failures within the royal household and the wider institution during a period of profound personal distress. His Majesty has concluded that continuing to serve as sovereign while these documented failures remain unacknowledged would be inconsistent with the duty of truth and reconciliation that the Crown owes to the memory of Diana, Princess of Wales, and to the public trust. The Prince of Wales will accede to the throne as King William V. A full independent review of the institutional practices documented in the journal will be commissioned, with findings to be published in full." The statement was unprecedented. No British monarch had ever stepped down citing institutional failure. No sovereign had ever publicly acknowledged that the institution had failed a member of the royal family. No abdication had ever centered the voice of a deceased woman rather than the circumstances of the living king. The media reaction was seismic. The constitutional implications were immediate. The public response was divided. Some praised Charles's moral courage, others questioned whether abdication was the appropriate response to historical wrongdoing. Still others demanded criminal investigations into the individuals named in the diary. But beneath the noise, beneath the analysis, beneath the political and constitutional debates, there was a quieter, deeper recognition. Silentworth had earthed, and that her voice had been powerful enough to end a reign. The diary itself remained sealed. Charles insisted, as a condition of his abdication, that the diary not be published, not in full, not in excerpts, not in authorized biography form. His reasoning, articulated in a private memorandum to William, was precise. This diary was written for my sons, not for the public, not for historians, not for journalists. Publishing it would violate her privacy in the very act of honoring her truth. The truth must be acknowledged. The institution must be reformed. The failures must be named. But the diary itself belongs to her sons and to her memory, and to the silence she chose to break only for them. William and Harry agreed. The diary will remain in the royal archives, accessible only to direct descendants of Diana, under conditions they jointly determine. Its contents will inform the independent review. Its truths will shape the reforms, but its pages will not be consumed by the public gaze that consumed Diana in life. Her privacy, denied to her while she lived, will be protected now that she is gone. What does this story tell us about the monarchy? It tells us that the institution's greatest vulnerability is not scandal, not republicanism, not financial mismanagement. It is truth. Specifically, the truth of those it has harmed. The monarchy has survived wars, abdications, divorces, deaths, and decades of public skepticism. But it cannot survive the unacknowledged truth of its own cruelty. Diana's diary proved that. Her words, written in code, hidden in a safe preserved across 30 years of silence, carried more weight than any constitutional document, any parliamentary debate, any public inquiry. Because they were true, not politically true, not strategically true, humanly true. And human truth, when it surfaces after decades of institutional suppression, carries a force that no amount of PR, legal maneuvering, or ceremonial deflection can withstand. Charles understood that. He understood that the crown he wore was incompatible with the truth Diana had recorded, and he chose the truth over the crown, over the institution, over his own legacy, over everything except the woman whose voice had been silenced for 30 years. It tells us that accountability, in the context of the monarchy, cannot be performative. It cannot be managed. It cannot be contained within the institution's existing frameworks of self-regulation. True accountability requires surrender, requires the relinquishment of power, requires the admission that the institution, as currently constituted, is incapable of delivering justice to those it has wronged. Charles's abdication was not a punishment, it was a recognition that the crown, in his hands, could not hold the truth Diana had entrusted to paper, that the institution under his leadership could not reform itself sufficiently to honor her memory, that the only way to acknowledge her truth was to step aside and allow someone else to build something new, something that might, however imperfectly, begin to earn the trust that had been broken. Not just in Diana's lifetime, but in the decades since. It tells us that Diana's agency extends beyond her death. She is often portrayed as a victim, as a tragic figure, as a woman destroyed by forces larger than herself. And she was. But she was also a witness, a recorder, a woman who, even in her most isolated, most surveilled, most institutionally suffocated moments, retained the capacity to document, to preserve, to ensure that the truth would outlast the silence imposed upon her. The diary is not evidence of her victimhood, it is evidence of her resistance, her refusal to be erased, her determination that her sons would know the truth, even if she could not tell them herself. That resistance, exercised in secret, in code, in fear, in grief, was an act of extraordinary courage. And it was that courage, preserved across 30 years, that ultimately reshaped the institution that had tried to extinguish it. Diana did not destroy the monarchy, but she ensured that the monarchy could not continue unchanged. Her diary was not a weapon. It was a mirror, and when Charles looked into that mirror, he saw what the institution had done. And he could not look away, and he could not reign. It tells us that William inherits not just a crown, but a reckoning. He becomes king not through the orderly succession of tradition, but through the rupture of accountability. His reign begins not with celebration, but with acknowledgement, not with continuity, but with correction, not with the assumption of inherited legitimacy, but with the burden of earned trust. That is an unprecedented foundation for a monarchy. No British king has ever ascended to the throne explicitly tasked with addressing institutional harm done to a predecessor. No sovereign has ever begun their reign with a mandate to reform the very structure that elevated them. William understands this. He has said, privately, that his mother's diary is not just a historical document. It is a governing directive, a compass, a reminder that the crown exists to serve truth, not to support. And that serving truth may require dismantling the very mechanisms that have sustained the crown for centuries. Harry's role in the aftermath is perhaps the most complex. He is no longer the rebel prince. He is no longer the exile. He is the son whose mother's truth ended a reign. He is the co-inheritor of a diary written for him and his brother. He is the man who, from across an ocean, helped shape the acknowledgement of his mother's voice. His relationship with the institution is permanently altered, not reconciled, is but transformed. He is no longer outside Forhyn. He is brother alongside his father's abdication, alongside the memory of a woman who wrote in code so that her sons would one day read in clarity. That position is painful. It is sacred. It is irreversible. And it is his. The independent review commissioned by William's accession proclamation will take years. Its findings will be uncomfortable. Its recommendations will be resisted. Its implementation will be incomplete. Institutions do not reform cleanly. They reform messily, incrementally, reluctantly. But the review exists. It exists because Diana wrote, because Charles read, because William accepted, because Harry affirmed, because Catherine translated, because 2 junior archivists found a safe behind a wall, because a moisture sensor triggered an alert, because chance and courage and truth converged in a basement archive on a Thursday morning and set in motion a chain of events that no amount of institutional planning could have predicted or prevented. Justice for Diana is impossible. She is gone. Nothing can restore what was taken, but the review is acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is the beginning of repair. Not for Diana. She is beyond repair. For the institution, for the public, for the sons who grew up believing a lie, for the grandchildren who will grow up knowing the truth, for the future that will be built, however imperfectly, on the foundation of a woman's silenced voice finally heard. What do you think? Was Charles right to abdicate upon reading Diana's diary, or should he have remained on the throne and led the reform process himself? Does abdication constitute meaningful accountability, or is it an escape from the harder work of institutional transformation? Should the diary ever be published, in whole or in part, or does protecting Diana's privacy outweigh the public's right to know the full truth? Can William's reign, founded on acknowledgement of institutional harm, genuinely transform the monarchy, or is the institution fundamentally incapable of the self-reckoning required? And what does Diana's diary tell us about the power of individual testimony to challenge systems designed to suppress it? Tell us in the comments below. We read everyone, and this story, more than any we have covered, demands the community's judgment. If you want to stay ahead of the royal stories the mainstream media will not touch, make sure you are subscribed to the bell. Share this with someone who understands that the most powerful truths are not shouted from balconies, but whispered in coded diaries hidden behind walls. Because in the House of Windsor, the crown passes by law, but truth passes by silence, by code, by safes behind walls, by archivists who find what was meant to be lost, by sons who read what was meant for them, by fathers who lay down crowns rather than carry lies, by mothers who write in the dark so that their children might one day see the light. Truth is the inheritance. Truth is the diary. Truth is the voice. Truth
is the silence broken. Truth is the reign ended. Truth is the reckoning begun. Truth is Diana. Truth is the grandmother. Truth is the mother. Truth is the woman. Truth is the witness. Truth is the resistance. Truth is the mirror. Truth is the crown laid down. Truth is the future built on acknowledgement. Truth is the review. Truth is the reform. Truth is the repair. Truth is the sons who know. Truth is the grandchildren who will know. Truth is the public that deserves to know. Truth is the institution that must learn to know. Truth is the silence that can no longer hold. Truth is the voice that can no longer be suppressed. Truth is the diary that survived. Truth is the safe that opened. Truth is the wall that yielded. Truth is the archivist who found. Truth is the king who read. Truth is the king who stepped down. Truth is the prince who ascends. Truth is the brother who affirms. Truth is the wife who translates. Truth is the mother who wrote. Truth is across 30 years of silence. Truth is the reign that ends. Truth is the reckoning that begins. Truth is Diana. Truth is forever. Stay curious, stay informed, stay questioning. And remember, every hidden safe has a key. Every coded diary has a reader. Every silenced voice has a moment when the silence breaks. Until next time,
Keep your eyes on the walls and your hearts open to the voices that refuse to be erased. Because the voice is the truth. Truth is the diary. Diary is the witness. Witness is the resistance. Resistance is the survival. Survival is the safe. Safe is the wall. Wall is the archive. Archive is the discovery. Discovery is the reading. Reading is the reckoning. Reckoning is the abdication. Abdication is the acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is the reform. Reform is the repair. Repair is the future. Future is the sons. Sons are the heirs. Truth is Diana. Diana is the mother. Mother is the voice. Voice is the silence broken. Silence broken is the reign ended. Reign ended is the reckoning begun. Reckoning begun is the truth honoured. Truth honoured is the diary respected. Diary respected is the privacy protected. Privacy protected is the voice preserved. Voice preserved is the legacy secured. Legacy secured is the future built. Future built is the truth carried. Truth carried is the silence filled. Silence filled is the voice. Voice heard is Diana. Diana is the truth. Truth is forever. The diary rests now in the royal archives, sealed, protected, accessible only to those for whom it was written. Its pages are not consumed by the public gaze. Its words are not commodified. Its truth is not reduced to headlines or sound bites. It exists as Diana intended, as a private testimony for her sons, preserved against the institutional forces that sought to erase her. And in that preservation, she wins, not posthumously, not symbolically. Actually, her voice survives, her record endures. Her truth shapes the future, not through publication, through presence, through the quiet, persistent, unassailable fact of her having written, having hidden, having trusted that truth would outlast silence. And it did. Through a safe behind a wall, through archivists who found what was meant to be lost, through a king who read what was meant for his sons, through a prince who ascends with his mother's truth as his compass, through a brother who affirms from across an ocean, through a wife who translates grief into governance, through a public that demands accountability, through an institution that, however reluctantly, begins to reckon. Diana's victory is not loud, it is not triumphant, it is not celebratory, it is quiet, persistent, unassailable, like the diary itself, like the truth it contains, like the voice that speaks across 30 years of silence and says, still to anyone willing to listen, I was here. I was silenced. I was not mad. I was not difficult. I was not the problem. The problem was the institution. And the institution must change. And it is changing. Because I wrote. Because I hid. Because I trusted. Because truth survives. Because I survive. In the diary. In the safe. In the archive. In the sons. In the reckoning. In the reform. In the future. In the truth. In the silence broken. In the voice heard. In the reign ended. In the acknowledgement made, in the repair begun, in the legacy secured, in the grandmother remembered, in the mother honoured, in the woman vindicated, in the witness believed, in the resistance recognised, in the mirror held, in the crown laid down, in the truth carried forward, in the Diana, in forever.